By the way, how are you feeling this morning? Yes, you. Happy? Not so much? Well, new polling shows happiness levels in the U.S. are on the decline, and it is especially prevalent in people under 30. Take a look at this curve. Historically, happiness is high when you're young. Then the deep, dark valley comes before happiness increases again, thankfully, with older age. But new research shows a shift in this happiness curve, largely based on Gallup polling. So the left side of the U-shape is when people are younger, and that shows happiness starting out much lower and staying below the norm before eventually increasing. And this happiness decline isn't happening in a vacuum. Researchers also found that people between the ages of 18 and 29 report struggling with meaning and purpose, their health, developing close relationships, and financial security. So what's behind the rise in unhappiness, and can anything be done about it? Paging Arthur Brooks for help. He is a social scientist, happiness author, and host of the How to Build a Happy Life podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
So, what is happening? Because, we can understand why people have a lot of happiness when they're younger, but now we're seeing younger people with less happiness than before. What's happening?
So typically what has happened until relatively recent history is that people actually have a lot of enjoyment early on in life. And that kind of wanes a little bit when you start having kids and paying a mortgage and have a lot of pressure at work. And, life is great as far as it goes, but then happiness picks back up again in your 50s, which I didn't know. By the time I got into my 50s, I said, oh.
Yeah, finally get it.
Coincidentally might coincide with the kids moving out. But what we find lately is there's a new pattern emerging, which is that younger people don't have that bliss in their 20s. You find that they actually have higher rates of clinical depression, higher rates of generalized anxiety, and we actually know why. Which is they're having a harder and harder time answering the question, what's the meaning of my life? Which is amazing when you think about it. It's such a big philosophical question.
And that question has existed since the beginning of time.
Exactly right.
So why are younger people today struggling with that question?
Well, normally
others hadn't.
Well, you can't answer that question perfectly. It sort of eludes the words.
Right.
But what you find is that people were doing things in their life that gave them the sense of meaning that they're not doing today. There's really 5 things that people do in their lives that gives them a sense of meaning. They fall in love. They worship or follow some sort of serious life philosophy. They find a calling in their work. They understand beauty, especially in nature, and that they understand that suffering is a sacred thing, that suffering is a normal thing. And what you find today is people are less likely to fall in love. They're less likely to worship in a traditional, at least traditional religious faith. They're less likely to say that their work is a calling. They're less likely to be out in nature, and they're trying to eliminate their suffering as opposed to growing and understanding what the meaning of their suffering is.
So, Arthur, it does sound as if a lot of these causes could be alleviated by removing yourself from the internet or removing yourself from social media, only because a lot of the things that you say, for example, finding meaning in your work. If your work is being an influencer, may make you a lot of money, but what is the true meaning in becoming an influencer and living your life entirely on social media? If you're not getting outdoors, or if you're not building a relationship, I've had young women.
Because you're doing this.
Remember, I did a story on dating in now in 2025. This young woman told me she can't even meet guys because guys are still living at home and afraid to approach women because they don't know how to talk to them.
And apps actually don't generally lead you to the kinds of relationships that are most compatible with what you're actually looking for. There's more dates and less attraction when we're actually intermediating that on apps.
I have lived that.
I have lived that, but you got through it.
I did.
She did.
Really important.
And then I met someone off the app.
Really?
Yes.
You met your husband not on the app?
Yeah.
We were basically arranged by our families.
That's the way it's supposed to be.
I met my wife the old-fashioned way, which was a friend introduced us at a party.
But plenty of people meet on the apps and get married.
They do, but it's a harder way to actually fall in love because actually it doesn't have that complexity to it. It actually, what you're doing is you're reducing the complex experience of falling in love to a complicated algorithm, and it's not the same. There's no mystery in that. And we find meaning in mystery. That's how humans are actually wired.
Meaning in mystery.
I knew it.
Meaning in mystery.
That's actually right. And the mysterious parts of life. And look, we know the neurochemistry out of this works too.
That ties into all of your 5 things.
Yeah.
Because there's mystery in love, there's mystery in nature,
right.
there's
all of
mystery
it.
in
calling,
your calling.
Suffering, nature and beauty.
The suffering
all
I don't
mystery.
quite understand.
No, the suffering.
Why do we want to
in fact, I've always said that.
or appreciate suffering?
Of course.
I've always said that you gain an understanding and a deeper appreciation of life when you suffer.
Yeah.
The title of my book is going to be Thankful for the Pain. Because you embrace the suffering and you embrace the pain because it leads to an enlightenment.
Yeah, exactly. If I asked either one of you, tell me when you really understood, you can't articulate it exactly, tell me when you understood the meaning of your life. You wouldn't say, that week at the beach in Ibiza.
Yeah, yeah.
You would no. You would actually talk about when my mother died, when I was afraid, when things were falling apart, and I persevered. There's something about suffering that's unbelievably sacred, and we have an approach to suffering, especially for people under 30, that says if you're depressed or anxious or sad, it means something's broken and wrong. Well, let me tell you. Life on earth has a lot of suffering to it. If you're not depressed and anxious ever, then you need therapy.
Wow, really, really interesting. Thank you, Arthur Brooks, as always. That was today's By the Way.